development, we're upping it to 6 dwelling units an acre, but similarly increasing the amount of required open space. Option 3, the rural residences. Sam and I talked about this quite a bit and settled on, only making that an option where utilities are not available. The idea is to focus and drive development where our utilities exist. We don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're having developers try to do something on lot or private systems, because those are a mess from the state level all the way down to the municipality level. So we really want to focus our development where we either have public utilities available or they are made available through whatever mechanism that is.
And yeah, I think that responds to what we heard from this group, and then also at the public meeting about like what was Hamlet, which is now residential flex, not going far enough and not really like basically allowing the option to continue suburban sprawl in these areas. So we didn't want to just put that as an option, even if there was utilities, because if there are utilities there, we want it to be denser. However, we needed that option 3 there because there's a lot of those spaces that do not have access to public utilities now. That's why there was that restriction.
Do we need to put a definition on what access to public utilities is? That kind of gray area, like, oh, it's 50 feet down the road, I can't get to it.
Or simply capacity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have sewer capacity, you're not going, it's
Not gonna build it.
yeah, it's not. And that's a reality.
I think
What's the justification for having roof type in that one, but not the others? Pitched roof required.
Oh, should we scroll down to?
On figure 203-5.
Got it.
Page 9.
Yeah,
Page 9 in the handout.
do you want to take that, Seth, or?
I don't know if I heard the whole question.
Oh, why the roof type is why we're suggesting or requiring a pitched roof for option 1 and 2.
Yes, I mean, the idea is to maintain a residential character. I don't think we ever really see flat roofs. I've seen them for residential uses, but it's quite uncommon. It's a lightweight kind of form-based regulation, but maintaining consistent residential character, roof lines can have quite an impact. And so that was the idea there, is if we have groupings of units or, say we've got a cluster of townhouses next to single family residential detached, that if we at least maintain that consistent roof style, it can look similar in form and shape, rather than having a significant differentiation between the two. But we do, when we get into some of our mixed use areas, like the mixed use, the Village Gateway, it becomes an option to do flat or pitched.
Is that something that, that's something we're suggesting because of kind of what Seth just said about having a variety of types of housing and kind of wanting some form standards around it. But what do you guys think about that requirement?
What are you thinking about, Sam?
I know other communities where most all the new development are not pitched roofs, and half the people hate it, half the people like it. But it's definitely varied. And I think that the design group that reviews these things gets more into it with the developer to come up with something that's going to look good, regardless of whether it's pitched or flat or something else. But
So your concern is the pitch roof is too constrictive?
yeah, I'd put it that way. Thank you.
I think I have to agree with you because, if you have a mixed use, why can't your townhouses or your multi-family be flat? Why does that have to have a pitch? Because you could actually expand your height, your living space.
I think, yeah. I think that's where the genesis of it was it's in a community that has limited building space, so everyone moved to that sort of style. To increase the floor areas.
Right. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, we can mix it.
I agree. I think that's a great point.
Is there a reason that the building height is limited to 36 when medium is 45?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to scale of development. We see medium density residential as an uptick from what's available to you in the residential flex. 36 feet's a 3-story building. But if we wanted to open that option up to 4 stories, we're just short of 50 feet.
And is that medium, I would have to look back, but that medium density height, is that for maybe the existing? So if we're trying to just keep it as is, but, I mean, this is all up for discussion, right?
There are a lot of really good topics.
I know, yeah, and so we'll definitely, we'll have a huddle with him.
Well, if we think, I mean, if we think about the density allowances that we're providing, 6 dwelling units an acre, I don't know if you're going to see a multifamily building that's any taller than 3 stories anyways.
Well, the only thing I would say is if you're familiar with the 2-over-2 stacked townhouse concept, that's one where that's 4 stories essentially. So that would be one that would be seen as a, missing middle type of housing concept where this would come into play because it would probably be like 48 feet.
I was like, yeah, I just don't want to put excess restrictions when there's no real,
I'm
real reason that we're trying to achieve it.
I'm happy to hear what I'm hearing. I think these are all great comments.
And what happens if you wanted to put the garages underneath?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's giving you more space, so your parking isn't, yeah.
That's it.
We can have that.
For parking. But
Yeah, so you're taking it up 5 feet to 40 and taking the roof pitch out of play, and you're making an actual living space or parking space.
Yeah, and I don't think that forces us to go back and change any of these density allowances. It just provides more options for development. You can make 48 feet work, great. If not, we will do something else. Okay. Another, I mean, option, another level of control for these development types is what we call our housing mix requirements. This is to kind of force the hand of doing variety of housing within larger scale developments. Anything less than 15 acres, we're not putting any restrictions on that. But when you start getting beyond 15 acres, between 15 and 50 acres, requiring at least 2 types of housing with a minimum percentage of each of 15%. If you'll notice here, single family detached, semi-detached, 2-unit townhouses and multi-unit are all kind of one of those qualifying housing types. So if you've got a 30-acre development, you could do single family detached and some duplexes or a couple sections of townhouses, and you could easily meet this requirement. And then once you get beyond 50 acres, that minimum number of types jumps up, and then we also increase that minimum percentage for each type. Any thoughts on what this means and this impact this could have on development? This is again another Tom conversation. I've seen tables like this. I've worked with tables like this, these types of regulations before. When you start getting into these larger scale developments, it becomes pretty simple to meet these requirements. I don't think they're too cumbersome for development. Okay.
Reasonable. I did. I actually just added a comment about it. Yeah.
And
Option,
Seth, is that just adopted national standard 15 to 50, those ranges? Is that
I would say it's a national standard. It's some Pennsylvania language that I've worked with before that I've seen.
okay?
But I did try to make sure that it made sense for New Garden too. Like,
Okay.
we're not saying less than 100 acres because there's not 100 acres of land out there.
100 acres. You're talking about one parcel or one property. Could it be
What?
lowered?
You certainly could. I mean, these are numbers you can play with.
Mhm.
I don't think there's no MPC or state regulations that say you have to allow for all single family on anything less than 10 acres. There's nothing that says that.
Yeah, that's the only thing I'm thinking is that the single family dwelling on your, and knowing the parcels that are still remaining that you're actually this is gonna be applied to are not, that great of acreage.
Yeah, what are they like around the 10 acre mark?
Within
what
the
would you-
residential flex areas, more than
Yeah.
likely, yes.
Yeah,
So what we could do, and this is something we can bring back, is like, we can just do a parcel, like acreage analysis of all of the parcels that we're
Yeah.
designating
Mhm.
as residential flex, and we'll give you some numbers, and then from that, we can create our buckets. Does that seem like a?
yeah, I think, yeah, Chris.
Oh, no, I was gonna say that was kind of the origination of why I was thinking about this is just where are these numbers coming from? Can we localize them? So. No, that'd be very helpful, Sam. And I would also, I don't know if it was, I thought I heard it mentioned. I'd be very interested in what Tom had to say about that.
Yeah, we can do that. That's a pretty straightforward analysis for us to do.
Sponsored by Hillcrest Association.
Endorsed. We'll say endorsed.
Endorsed, yeah.
Endorsed in the zoning ordinance update.
Yeah.
Okay, our option 3 for rural residences, and I didn't want to ignore your comment here, Michael, about option 3. Is there a benefit to this restriction?
We addressed it in my opinion.
Okay.
I kind of agree with the remaining tracks where there is utilities, we should be pushing for more density.
Well, and I've been thinking about this more leading up to this meeting. And I'm going to jump down to the dimensional standards for residential flex option 3. I kind of think we need to, at least somewhere in here, establish a maximum lot size. No, it would have to be in options 1 or 2. Because what in theory could happen, if we really want to focus new development and increase density in these options, in these areas where options 1 and 2 are viable, but we don't have a maximum lot size, in theory, someone could come in and do 2-acre estate development. If we're okay with that, fine. If we really want to push the envelope, you establish flexible minimum lot sizes, but a maximum lot size of, I don't know, 1/3 of an acre to cut the ability to do that type of large scale lot development, which results in multi-million-dollar houses.
I would also just, I know we already talked about it. I don't know what it really constitutes between what is defined as a rural residences and then access to infrastructure, because there's a vagary. So someone could probably say if they're 100 yards off of Route 41 and there's no existing sewer or water, I mean, that could be argued. So I just don't know what those standards entail.
So I know your sewer is not publicly owned.
That is correct.
What is their what is their requirement, Chris, for new development that's within close proximity to you? Do they require an extension if they're within like 150 feet of an available line?
I
The
don't,
current ordinance says that.
is that the linear feet? Is it 150?
It's 150.
Yeah, it's 150.
Okay,
in the current ordinance.
yeah, I mean, that's not far, so it's,
No, it's not.
so anything beyond 150 feet from a known line could be categorized as a rural resident, which would be a significant portion of the residential flex zoned areas.
Yeah, so.
Unless they chose, well, I guess. I think the idea is instead of access, it's served by. So if you're gonna go through the process of either voluntarily or involuntarily extending sewer service, if that's an option, if that's possible,
Yeah.
you can do options 1 and 2. If not,
Well,
or
this
it's
kind of
not
came up
feasible.
with, I think it was even when the conversation with Sheehan Road. So with that, originally, there was no real viable initial path towards getting access to sewer. And then the cost prohibitive element of funding, the developer funding connections. And because of the, I guess the way everything is right now, they were saying, okay, well, we'll scrap this plan and just go to a smaller, kind of what you're talking about, larger estate home type style function, and everyone's on septic.
Yeah.
And that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, and that's what would happen here is option 3 would kick in and your minimum lot size is an acre,
Yeah.
or if the county or the health department says something
Is
else.
there like a benefit by saying reasonable access to public utilities?
Well,
You can't define reasonable.
I know, yeah.
yeah, I mean, reasonable is subjective, but we also codify it elsewhere. Like we say 150 foot is the, I think instead of access, we say serviced by public utilities.
Service by.
Is it potential that back like the table 6 where we're talking about different acre buckets? That the definition of nearby utilities is different? So if you're developing 5 acres, if utilities are within 200 feet, you have to hook up to them. But if you're developing 50 acres, you have to be willing to run utilities further.
So something similar to this, but if you want to do that large acre
Potentially, yeah,
development,
'cause
The utility thing is a whole different bag now that we have a private sewer company.
it is. But
They're extracting
this is what we.
fees for anybody that wants. We have no control, right?
it is
That,
what it-
the housing unit down there, didn't they have to go to Aqua and agree to pay a big fee?
Mm-hmm.
but like
So
we
it's
talked
all about, we have no control. And we have no control over the water for that matter.
Yeah, but like we mentioned earlier, it is a base infrastructure that we really should be driving towards because.
So,
once they septic-
but if somebody's gonna do something, it has to be accepted by the utilities that they're gonna service them.
Mhm.
That's what you really want to incorporate. That they've agreed to it, not that we're within 150 feet or 150 miles. It's, are you gonna pay Aqua and are you gonna pay just a water authority? And are they gonna agree to extend it?
Yeah.
So you have to come forward with a plan that says you have access.
Regardless of.
Where it is.
Distances.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking, you know, the couple of large tracks that we've left. That's what we're gonna want developers to do. We're gonna want them to bring water and sewer to it
Mhm.
and not develop them as 1 acre minimum lots.
Mhm.
So it's just, how do we write this ordinance to push?
But to Don's point, you can write the ordinance however you want.
Oh, yeah.
If they're not gonna give you access, then yeah, you're
Yeah.
1 acre lots.
So you have to have access. That's the key. You have to come forward. What's wrong with saying you have to come forward with access agreements
Yeah.
with the sewer and
Is
the
it,
water?
is it worth having like a separate breakout section and try to have somebody from Aqua and Chester Water, you know, look at a map with us?
Yeah,
I-
it seems critical.
They are, and they are major
You don't
contributing.
wanna call it limiter.
I mean, would they be willing to do that?
We can ask them.
I have a strong relationship with Mark Bobel. He's our local kind of regional contact, and I'll throw this in front of him about how we should be pursuing language to govern this. So
and I think, I don't
And the other
wanna,
part of that, I think the development itself is gonna dictate, the developer's gonna wanna put more houses in
Yeah, well,
than the 1 acre option.
that's what I was gonna say, Robert, like, I would be interested, so we're working, Seth and I are working with the township up in the Lehigh Valley, trying to really encourage cluster development, but they have this lack of sewer infrastructure issue. And so we had a working group with a bunch of developers, and basically we're like, hey, what would it take for you to extend the sewer? Like, what densities do you need to do that? And they kind of told us what they were looking for. And it all comes down, it's all about money, right?
Yeah, they
Um,
want to sell more houses.
So do option one and two, does that give enough incentive, or do we need to up that? Because that's what we were
Right.
using. So we can add it to the top list.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's relative, right? You know, if there's an existing sewer line that's 300 feet away and they need to extend it and develop it and they do option two, great. But if it's 3 miles away, option two might not be enough. And we might not put an option in front of them that is enough.
It's just, finding that line, because for.
Yeah,
40
it's
units,
finding
you're
what makes the most.
And we don't know,
Or 75 units.
we're always sitting here, we don't know what that
Yeah.
number is. They know what that number is, the
Yeah.
developer knows what
Yeah.
that number is,
Yeah.
but sitting here, you can't.
So mushroom composting and mushroom operation, clustering, I'm putting it on the list of like having a dedicated time that we can come back. We're also like, we can have those conversations with Aqua, as staff and then come back to that information.
But make sure you get to Chester Water Authority too. I don't,
We'll get both of them in the same room.
yeah.
No, that'll be fun.
A suit will result.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to one
They'll be
here.
bought, and I'll be paying $500 a week for my water.
Well, I was gonna joke, get him in the same room, but we'll just call it Aqua. Cause that's
Yeah.
probably what's going to happen. How much more do we have in terms of just getting through the list here? Cause I see we're getting short on time.
Yeah, not a whole lot more, Chris. At least in terms of comments that we have. I'll pick up the pace a little bit. It does get a little bit easier to talk through. I know residential flex is a big talking point. Option three, rural residences, we'll come back and talk about the impacts of flex in a future conversation. Village center, this is kind of around the Tough Kenneman area. Our dimensional standards are, shown on the screen there, relatively small minimum lot sizes, lot widths and setbacks. Michael, that's a great comment. We'll see what we can dig up, working with Robert and Chris on some plans or something around that area. I'm sure as part of that streetscape plan that there's at least references to documents we can look at for right-of-way widths and such and see what the impact is on these, because the right-of-ways are pretty far out and maybe that presents an issue with existing structures. In both the village center and the village gateway and the mixed-use corridor is where we start implementing, or just village center, village gateway is where we start implementing some of our building form standards that I mentioned earlier. This needs to be village center, relatively lightweight regulations as far as building form restrictions go. The idea is to activate our corridors by locating buildings in front of parking lots, and we'll hash that out in more detail when we do our parking and circulation articles at a later date. We want to see a variety of massing and materials, facade articulations. We did our best to kind of define what that is, provide some standards for what that is without being too heavy-handed. These graphics right here, like for the transparency, this will be in the actual definition section, the final adoptable ordinance, but they're here for reference tonight. 5-foot minimum sidewalks within the village commercial district or village center district. This would be for new and infill development. We're not going to go back and force people to put sidewalks in. But if they do go in with new projects, we're establishing a minimum standard. Since we struck pitched roof from residential flex, I think it makes sense to pull it out of village center and then village gateway, because it would be the only one that has it and it doesn't really make sense. We do want to see utilities screened and not visible from ground level. And then talking about building transparency, this is where we start, having the conversation around windows and storefronts, activating our lower levels more at a 70% level, and then reducing that restriction on the upper levels, 40% building transparency. Those are pretty typical standards as far as like walkable pedestrian mixed use areas go. So we can certainly talk about that. Providing for a variety of building materials. We want to see our building entrances located at the front of buildings or adjacent to sidewalks. We don't want to have our primary building entrances on the rear, adjacent to parking lots. Again, just kind of reiterating that point of activating our corridors, our frontages, and our pedestrian environment. And then some building height variation, where every 75 feet of continuous building facade, we would see at least a 2-foot variation in building height. Again, just to break up that massing and create a more comfortable feel at the pedestrian scale. Any questions about that village center and those form-based requirements before I go to Village Gateway?
What is our intention for parking? I agree it's a pedestrian focused, but what is?
So the intention in terms of minimum requirements, location, setbacks, landscaping, kind of the whole
Well, yeah, it's,
kid and caboodle.
yeah. It's supposed to be retail, commercial, residential, the small side lots and everything, but how do people get to it if we're a suburban, rural community with lots of driving?
I have a comment about that. The mixed use is it actually says auto oriented. I'm not sure that's necessary because of course, I think that by default, it's going to be all designed for automobiles.
That's fair.
I see that the Village Core and the Village Gateway are the only two that have sidewalks mentioned. And there's no pathway mentioned in any of this. We're focusing on bringing people into that mixed use. And then we're saying in there, it's auto oriented, whereas if you have, shared use pathway or just pathway more in these, in all the various categories or districts, it would help us get the people out. Because I think New Gardens has a lot of growth that can happen in terms of getting people out of their homes and moving beyond their street that's safe to walk in and getting to the next neighborhood or to the mixed use area. So to give effect to that interconnectability part that we want to increase in New Garden to get more development here and get it booming a bit more, it might be helpful to add some of those words to the different districts. Besides just having them in VC, VG, and again, take mixed use and put in there also that it's expected that there'll be pathways for people to get through. It doesn't have to be sidewalks because I know concrete's expensive. But again, that asphalt that we have in different communities is sufficient.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point. Like with mixed use corridor, it's like, I don't necessarily see those pathways or sidewalks along the street, right? But in between the developments or something kind of like on the back end.
I think it's best if they're along the street, but with the separated buffer.
Yeah.
Because you don't want it hidden in a way. I think people want to move along the road, not in a car, but on an e-bike or whatever else is going to come down in the future, or running or walking. And that gets people interacting with each other and creates that community.
So in the parking and circulation article, there's going to be a lot in terms of access, location of parking, what the minimum parking looks like. And it's going to, I still do think it's gonna, Village Center and Village Gateway are gonna look a lot different than mixed use corridor. I think mixed use corridor, we need to be a little bit more lenient, but we certainly still don't want parking lots out front, right? So there's gonna be a lot of regulations with that. So I think that's in January, maybe. So stay tuned. But I think we can add some of that language, Sam, to like the intent statements of these.
Yeah. Yeah, so like, back to my question though, like with Tokenman, the way this is going, it will get built up kind of like Cannon Square. Is the intention that once it gets built up, then the township will have to find a way to fund a parking garage within 2 or 3 blocks of it, to help maintain commercial viability. and accessibility,
Or
or,
have to have some sort of parking.
yeah. Like.
But do you envision Tough Cannon being what? As dense as Kent's where
Well, I don't know, this is pretty dense coverage, up to 80% max lot coverage. Yes,
Well,
good.
I don't, and Seth, we can chime in terms of parking from your perspective, but like. No one's ever going to build something, like they were going to put parking in, and because then they're not gonna have customers, right? And so like, I don't think you're gonna get, until it's like super, super built out,
Yeah.
like Kennett Square, which I don't see that happening
Yeah.
anytime soon, but I think in the meantime, there's going to be, like, in our parking regulations, we can encourage flexible kind of parking standards, deferring to ultimately what the market is going to tell the developer that they need in terms of parking for a lot of these. But we can get into this a lot more in parking and circulation.
Yeah, just trying to understand the vision.
And, you know, this is our first draft on this one, so this will come back to you as kind of the same final draft form as the uses article. So this will give Sam and I an opportunity to review these meeting notes and make some changes to respond to these comments. Village Gateway, you know, similar to Village Corridor, but allowing for larger lots, a more increased intensity of development, you know, taller buildings comparatively, to kind of step out away from the center of the village and move along the corridors there. Relatively the same type of articulation and building form standard requirements about massing and articulation. You know, with this being slightly more auto-oriented, I'm not going to say that in here, but less, you know, dense in terms of proximity to residential and pedestrian areas. Didn't necessarily think like the building height articulation was as important, or variation for the Village Gateway, but we do bring in a lot of the same transparency requirements at a different reduced scale, because we are kind of going into more of a commercial retail type of development, you know, area. And I think to the point about, you know, we want to see sidewalks, but have them set back away from road right of ways. You know, we can include language in here about green strips between right of ways and sidewalks. We can cover that in parking and circulation. There's plenty of opportunity to make those types of changes. The mixed use corridor, it's a good note about striking the language about being auto oriented. You know, increase our minimum lot sizes, increasing minimum lot widths, and allowing for more of your traditional commercial retail development to occur. Not incorporating the same types of form standards that we see in Village Center and Village Gateway. Enterprise district, Michael, that's a good note about maximum building height in the enterprise. You know, I kind of looked at other examples from our model ordinance, other things that we've worked in terms of kind of an industrial style development feel. 35 feet was kind of hitting that middle ground. We could take another pass at that. You know, with it being a minimum lot size of an acre, and this kind of goes back to also what we define as lot coverage. When I am building out these requirements, and we can argue about this, my interpretation of lot coverage is, you know, building footprint rather than total impervious area. That comes through separate regulations, but if we want to think about them in a different way, that might impact how we're looking at these percentage requirements.
While you're just talking about that, I think that's important because having the separation between maximum lot coverage and maximum building coverage, they should be defined, I think.
Mhm.
Because I've run into it before where they, you know, you're doing a zoning something down the road for a you know, a deck or whatever it is. You're running, that definition's not clear.
Yeah, usually in my experience, if you're looking at it in terms of building, it's anything under a roof. So if you're putting on an unroofed deck, it doesn't hurt you in terms of your lot coverage.
Yeah, or whatever you're doing, it should be defined.
So Article 2 is definitions, and I think, have that scheduled towards the end of the process. So we do that on purpose because like, we don't know what other terms are gonna come out that we're gonna want to define. But we'll make sure that that's included in there, and maybe something that could be helpful. And sorry, Seth, this might not be the most helpful for us, but something that we could do is share like a very rough draft of the definitions, like based on definitions that we typically use as like maybe a potential reference point for these conversations, knowing that it's not a draft for New Garden, it's more just like
A
a
library.
reference.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a library, thank you. Yeah, we can do that. Because even like with height, like how is height measured, where stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah, it's at 50% of the total.
Exactly.
Yeah. Airport district is relatively similar in terms of dimensional standards and requirements to the enterprise district. Slightly larger minimum lot width requirements and slightly different lot coverage requirements, but largely taken from what's existing today. Mentioned the airport hazard overlay and the flood hazard overlay earlier. These are all existing restrictions in the New Garden zoning ordinance. We thought about incorporating them directly into, for example, the airport district, but I think looking back through these requirements, it's most appropriate being retained as an overlay, just because there's dimensional requirements based on proximity and those types of things. And they can change and make them more flexible over time. But no real change here. If there's anything that has become an issue or we need to talk about in terms of the airport hazard overlay, the flood hazard overlay, please let us know.
Was there a incorporation of the standards in the FAA circular advisories around airfields on that?
It was not, but we can
Exactly.
Okay.
FAA
So that's what
circular.
really restricts as considerations that we have to seek waivers of future development around the airport has to be basically vetted through the FAA as adoptive standards of what's being built there. And that's based off of the circulation advisory set by the FAA.
And that's not in your current overlay?
It exists kind of outside of it, so I would look at that just to see
Oh,
if there is some, so, yeah, so, I don't know if one informed the other, obviously not vice versa, we're not informing the federal government standards, so, but that's one where it would make sense to take a look to see what that means.
Okay.
And you could also even get rid of this language and just say in accordance with FAA circulation advisory standards. But it's one where we build stuff there. If it's not within the realm of that kind of allowable like structure, everything has to seek waivers and conditions approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. So they give us millions of dollars in grant funding. They get to say what goes there. That's kind of the rule. So.
And we do prefer to link to like other like the federal or state regulations because they just change, and then this way you're not worrying about updating your
Correct.
ordinance.
Yeah, that was the thought on that one too. So yeah. I would look that up. Yeah. I have it somewhere in an email, then I can send it to you. But it's searchable. You can easily find the standards.
I'm sure I can find it.
No.
Well, that was the extent of what I wanted to talk about in terms of the actual article about the districts. We have provided, go ahead, Sam.
One thing, Don, I know you had a lot of comments on the flood hazard overlay.
Yeah.
Generally, if we're not hearing major concerns from the township or the municipality about their flood overlay, we keep existing language because a lot of it's also dictated by. So this is something we do have actually a lot of staff that work with FEMA and have experiencing reviewing flood hazard overlays. So this is something that we'll get with the township about. And basically say like, hey, do you want us to look at this in more depth? Are there certain concerns that you have? Because we haven't heard them to this point, so we just put the existing language in.
Well, I would say that the thing on the manure, if you call a guy by the name of Kaufman, a professor at the University of Delaware, who does the contract testing of the water, the reservoir water for the city of Newark, he'll tell you that the hazard is nitrates we're sending to them every day, and that they're getting algae blooms. And that's all from storage of manure. So that's a hazardous condition, in his opinion, in my opinion. And I think it should be dealt with because this township is half manure.
Is that, should that be on the flood?
Yeah.
Floodplain ordinance?
It doesn't prevent storage of food in floodplains here.
Oh, in the flood, okay, I see what you're saying.
Well, Donna, I think you just came up with a new township vision statement and branding. The township is half manure.
Yeah.
We're full of.
By the way,
Full.
they're sending the nitrates now. And Bachman is supposed to send me the readings, but he sent me a text of samples of the water. And he said, very high in nitrates.
I think one way to help with that, we have a list of very specific chemicals.
Yeah, right.
So I think it should be more generic headings, so like corrosives, poisons. And then you can list the specific chemical as an example, or, you know, not limited to, you know, including but not limited to other related corrosives, poisons, and the full hazmat list. Just, you give this specific list and somebody will find a loophole in it. To your point, like nitrates, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't care what we do with this, like, just don't put in there that file can be found at the township office. Because that's an ordinance and they don't exist.
Well, we'll talk offline about this, but I still need, yeah, we still want to see where your overlays are with some of the stuff, so. Okay, we will not put that. I know we're at time, almost at time, I'm gonna get you to planning commission. It's okay that we didn't get to the draft zoning map, because as you saw in my email, the township and we have some work to do in terms of the open spaces. But this is out there. I encourage you, since you have a month, you know, not just a week, to look at this, but the interactive map is a lot more helpful. Right, because you can zoom in and you can see the property owners. So take a look at this, comment away. We started adding comments based on our discussions with the township, and we'll bring this back next month. Other than that, same deal with Article 3, as we always do after these meetings, a week to submit additional comments on the online version, so get those comments in before Thanksgiving, and then we'll revise, respond, and go from there. Next month, we have some, I think, general regs, non-conformities, and one other section that I'm forgetting, but essentially they're kind of like basic sections, like not that controversial. So I think we'll have a lot of time to revisit the map. So, any questions before we close out? Okay. Seth, thanks for starting the meeting, and thanks to whoever's computer we're using that got started on my behalf.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
All right, have a good night.
Thanks.